The soft rain echoed on the thin tin of my car's roof as I pulled up to an unassuming house in an insignificant town, not far from nowhere. The house would have been little more than another tinderbox against the drab backdrop of gray skies and dying green, had it not been for the subtly beautiful stranger coming down the path towards me. As I watched her walk quickly down the path, clearly used to the cold rain but not unaffected by it completely, I couldn't help but wonder who she really was, and what her heart longed for. I felt that whomever she was, she must have been happy to escape for a moment as she got into the car and flashed me a smile, her wet hair falling around her soft, lonely eyes in the low light of another stormy day. With the reassurance of her smile and an awkward hello, I put the car into drive and we pulled away. As we drove towards dinner, awkward silence filled the space between us, but neither of us seemed to mind, instead content to just be in each other's presence. As we reached our destination, the car ducked into a tattered parking ramp and came to a stop in one of the spots. With the slamming of doors, we ran to the restaurant's entrance, the sharp bite of the cold rain momentarily breaking the tension between us as we laughed at the duress of our situation, as common as I was sure it was for both of us. We shuffled around the restaurant's usual patrons as we made our way to the hostess's podium, looking to be seated. She led us to our table, and we sat down awkwardly and looked anywhere but at each other at first. But eventually we managed a few words and found each other's lonely gaze, where our eyes stayed from there on, transfixed by the mystery behind them. When our food came to the table, we ate and told stories that couldn't have been more different, yet the same. We talked of love and loss, of forgotten dreams and fallen friends, and the way we saw the world, unafraid to let each other into the deepest perils of our mind. We gave in to the longing to be known by someone and enjoyed the unashamed transparency of conversation in a life hidden behind the day-to-day niceties of society. We took comfort in the fact that we could see each other for who we were, even if neither of us really knew who that was anymore. The drinks disappeared as the minutes passed, our food long since gone, and the sun had begun to set behind dark rain clouds, revealing yet another night under skies so very far from the homes we'd once known. Midwest, East Coast, sunny California, or across the shimmering seas, it didn't matter where we'd come from or where we were going. Our paths had crossed, and the longing we felt to be known was universal. Her fingers went to my arm as we left the restaurant, pulling herself closer to me, and I felt a spark charge the cold air between us as we walked back to the car, my pulse quickening. I got her door and then went around to get in myself. When I closed the door behind myself and turned to her, I found her gaze upon me, her eyes looking excited now in the low light as she looked at me anxiously, wondering what was next. I looked back to her, my heart beating rapidly in my chest, wondering if it was a false sense of intimacy stoked by the conversation we'd had over dinner, or if this girl really warmed my heart. Unable to tell the difference in the dark cold of another night alone in the place I now called home, I gave in to my baser instincts and leaned in closer until her lips met mine, lightning cracking in my mind, a warm sensation flooding my extremities, despite the brisk air in the now cold car that had sat for hours while we'd conversed over dinner. When we finally came up for air, I asked her if she'd like me to take her home, and with her eyes still sparkling, she shook her head gently no. I started the car, aware of every little sound, vibration, and smell it made now, my senses heightened by the perfect stranger, holding my hand tightly as we pulled away and drove. When we reached my apartment complex, everything seemed silent, despite the hundreds of people living under one roof, clearly a place more dead in life than most. We made our way to the door quickly, still aware of how cold it was outside, and she continued to cling to my arm as we climbed the stairs and eventually reached my door. I fumbled for my keys, and once I found the right one, I opened the door, the lock making a metallic clicking sound as it accepted the key. We went inside the dark apartment, and I turned on a light. The dated bulb's yellow glow did little more, though, than produce shadows in the dark room. She walked around the tiny apartment, looking at the posters on my walls, my papers on my desk, and the mess around my bed, seemingly fascinated by my mundane life. Once she'd finished her exploration, she sat down on my couch and looked to me as if calling me over. I went to the refrigerator and opened it, the harsh light inside providing more light in the room than the bulb above. I pulled a bottle of chilled white wine from the lowest shelf and held it up so she could see it. She nodded her head in approval, and I turned to the cupboard to pull out the only 2 glasses I owned. I popped the cork and poured us each a glass. I carried them over to the couch and sat next to her, careful not to spill. She took hers and kissed me as she did, lingering for a moment before she pulled away and took a sip of the sweet white wine. She closed her eyes and laid her head back on the couch, letting everything go. And I admired how comfortable she was in a place she'd never been, how at home she seemed with someone she'd known for only a few mere hours. And I found it comforting in a way. It felt like I belonged, almost, sitting next to her in that moment. Her touch was tender as our drinks on the bedside warmed in the passing night, and I glanced out the window as she pulled me closer. The clouds had finally cleared and the sky was now starkly visible out the small window of my bedroom, and I couldn't help but think the stars looked lonely, shining so brightly, millions of miles apart. I wondered as I looked up at them if they didn't long to be together like they were in the beginning. It was little more than a passing thought, though, as her lips touched my skin softly, and I looked back to her, seeing in her moonlit eyes that she knew that this was all we had. This moment, this night, this lifetime. We were just passing through it, and we knew all too well that tomorrow it might be gone, stolen by the light. As the night wore on, our breath came quicker as we tried to feel something in that silent night, grasping for something real, knowing that tomorrow was just around the corner, and before we knew it, it was gone. The moment had passed, and it was just another memory. The fading smell of her perfume on the empty pillow beside me, little more than a reminder of the tempered sting of loneliness that the strange angels wrought on the empty night.